few words in remembrance of my grandfathers. For those of you that may not know me, I am Roger Mason. I am the son of Roger Mason, the father of Roger Mason, and the incredibly proud grandson of Roger Mason. On behalf of Roger's partner Linda, his children Nancy, Roger, and Cindy, I want to thank you for joining us to celebrate Roger's life. When George W. Bush eulogized his father, George H.W. Bush, he opened with a saying that the goal of life is to die young, as late as possible. I think we can all agree that my grandfather accomplished that goal, having filled his 92 years on this earth with friends, family, and adventure. This was undoubtedly the most difficult speech that I've ever had to give, as my grandfather was one of the three most important men in my life, who, coincidentally, are all named Roger. As my grandfather's health declined, I thought about this very moment and what I would say to properly honor him, to share some of his lessons, and to spark some memories of his life. I'd find myself out on runs, trying to escape the stress associated with watching this mountain of a man fight for his life, and fight he did to the very, very end. During these runs, I'd experienced a full range of emotions, and while tears frequently filled my eyes, I usually ended feeling incredibly grateful for the 39 years that he was in my life. It is this feeling of gratefulness that I hope to leave you with today. So, who is Roger Mason? He was Linda's partner. He cared immensely for her. While he wasn't one to frequently offer displays of affection or words of affirmation, his love for her was evident in nearly everything he did. He and Linda traveled the world together, enjoyed friends and families together, built a life together. He loved her family, who loved him right back. He took care of her, and in the end, she took care of him. Who was Roger Mason? He was Lucille's husband. While their relationship didn't follow the path of traditional successful marriages, they were able to build a family with their children Nancy, Roger, and Cindy. Their marriage was far from perfect, but in the end, they were able to reconcile and together marvel at their creations. Who was Roger Mason? He was the father of Nancy, Roger, and Cindy. His relationship with each of his children was noticeably different, but equally special. He stood by Nancy when she needed him the most. He was my dad's most important mentor, and he taught Cindy that she could fix and do nearly anything. When my mom and dad were married over 40 years ago, he welcomed Joanne as his daughter, who ultimately became his most cherished nurse. She was by his side until the absolute end. He provided her purpose, and she provided him companionship and compassion. Who was Roger Mason? He was the very best grandfather. He pushed me to be the man I am today, to proudly earn the right to wear this uniform and serve just as he did. He marveled as Will earned his PhD and became a professor. He looked on with awe and slight concern about property taxes when Liz purchased her house. Lesson from Grandpa, property taxes only ever go up. He proudly watched Kat grow to seasoned manager in her early 20s. He loved each of our partners and always engaged in a meaningful, albeit brief, conversation. He loved his great-grandchildren, Hunter, Parker, Roger, Patrick, and Maeve, and turned out to be quite the baby hog in recent years. He was so incredibly proud of all of us. Who was Roger Mason? He was an early adopter. He's the first person that I knew with a plug-in hybrid vehicle and a geothermal heating system. To be clear, the primary purpose of both was to save money, with a very, very minor side benefit of helping the environment. He helped me make my first online purchase using one of his credit cards in the mid-90s, a terrible smelling bottle of cologne for my dad. He used a computer, an iPhone, an iPad, and an Amazon Echo, all of which frequently broke. It was quite common to get a phone call from him asking for help to get back online. My dad and I shared the unenviable task of restoring his connection, often to see his inbox filled with emails from some guy named Mike peddling pillows and conspiracy theories, and some kids named Eric, Ivanka, and Donald begging for money from their dad. I suppose this was better than his own kids asking him for money. Who was Roger Mason? He was a great connector and friend to many. He communicated so well with a diverse group of people. He was equally as comfortable dining with mayors, doctors, lawyers at the New Bedford Country Club as he was turning wrenches on lawnmowers with the mechanics at Peckham's Rental Center. He loved building relationships across our community and filled his retirement by hanging out at auto body shops, airports, machine shops, and other establishments that smelled of metal shavings, oil, and progress. He measured people not by their degrees, wealth, or social status, but rather by their ability to contribute in meaningful ways to society. He loved doing small favors for friends, and he especially loved when those favors were returned. Our friends became his friends, and he truly cherished those friendships. Who was Roger Mason? He was an exceptional deal hunter and deal maker. If the price was right, he was interested regardless of need. It was not uncommon to get a call or arrive at his house and see a new car. The car was often accompanied by a story about the deal with spotty details about rebates, tax incentives, and trade prices for his old car. My dad and I called this grandpa math. The math seldom added up, but that didn't really matter. What mattered was that he got a deal. I remember the time he returned from one of his 30 cruises having bought 19 pieces of different art. In fact, his affinity for cruises was the perceived deal of the cruise itself, and not a love of the ocean or the destinations. This was most evident following a cruise to Alaska, where he described the magnificent glaciers as nothing more than a couple of ice cubes floating in his drink, and quickly moved on to his performance at the casino, which also involved grandpa math. To this day, I can't walk through a base exchange without mentally noting the price of Crown Royal or his favorite Tanqueray gin. I inherited this habit from my grandfather. This isn't to say that he was a particularly big drinker, but rather enjoyed buying the liquor for a discount and often give it away to friends and family. In case you're wondering, Crown Royal is currently $37.99 at the base exchange. He taught me the art of the deal with sayings like, "It costs nothing to make an offer," and "A handshake is as good as a signature." It turns out both sayings are terrible advice. And if you don't believe me, just ask Paul River Ford. Who was Roger Mason? He was a soldier and a patriot. He enlisted in the Army as he was graduating high school, not even old enough to vote, 17 years old. This was during the end of World War II, a most turbulent time for our country. He earned his commission as an officer during the Korean War, and while I don't believe he ever saw combat, I am fully confident that he was prepared to defend the country he so dearly loved. He loved the Army and the pride associated with service. He proudly flew the American flag at his house and established military displays around New Bedford. Some of the tanks on display at various shopping squares in New Bedford are a direct result of his patriotism and deal-making. He was proud of his rank as a colonel, earned through 42 years of distinguished service. While proud, he never bragged and respected all service members, regardless of rank. He did take great pleasure in the Eagle sticker fixed to his windshield, denoting his rank, and made sure to get a spare for my dad's car. He'd grin driving around the Coast Guard Academy having cadets render salutes at him. Who was Roger Mason? He was a servant leader. He actively sought ways to support his country, community, and family. In his role as a business manager for the school department, he made sure thousands of kids had the tools they needed to grow. He negotiated teacher salaries, which at times may have been awkward given his relationship with my 5th grade teacher, Linda. Beyond the school system, he'd eagerly find and negotiate deals on canned peaches to improve fundraising margins at the Apple Peach Festival. Spoiler alert, the peach cobbler at the Apple Peach Festival is not using native peaches. This was most recently on display when he cared for Linda's brother. When he came to his family, his support was truly next level. This was most recently on display when he cared for Linda's brother David, as David bravely battled cancer. My grandfather took David under his wing and cared for him like a brother. I can attest that there is no better place to be than under my grandfather's wing. Who was Roger Mason? He was the best teacher and mentor that we could ever ask for. He exemplified the most important character traits like resilience, persistence, and self-sufficiency. He rebuilt his career numerous times, added skill sets along the way to make himself more marketable. He taught himself to be an electrician, earned college degrees in his 50s, and never, ever gave up. A few years ago, he had an unsuccessful eye surgery that left his vision distorted and doubled as he looked up and down. Shortly after the surgery, while we were working on the cars we so often did, his innate ability to estimate the size of nuts and bolts was suddenly gone, as many appeared larger than they actually were. Rather than give up or even get frustrated, he adapted to this new impediment and simply soldiered on, as he so often did. He took great pride in being able to do things for himself. Last month, I was able to listen as my Aunt Cindy asked him about building their house at 35 Meadow Lane. She asked him something along the lines of, "Did you know how to build a house?" To which he answered, "No, not really, but we figured it out." The story went on to recount the deals necessary to acquire the beams, mill the wood, and other details he vividly remembered 70 years later. The house is still standing with those original beams and stair treads and everything else it needed to be a home. Of course, the true measure of a great teacher is their ability to convey those lessons. Well, I'm here to tell you that his resilience, his persistence, his self-sufficiency is alive and well in at least 3 other Roger Masons. The hard one. In And finally, who is Roger Mason? He was unequivocally my dad's best friend. For over 60 years, they shared a bond that transcends nearly all father-son relationships. He taught my dad to be a dad, who in turn taught me to be a dad. Accounting for weekends lost to travel, work obligations, and other mundane interferences, such as the birth of your first son, me, I estimate that they shared at least 2,000 Saturdays together. Saturdays were sacrosanct, reserved for father and son time. 39 years ago, I was invited to join this club, and 4 years ago, we brought my son Roger. Most Saturdays were routine: wake up early, go to breakfast, find a shop of some sort to hang out at, and start a project. However, there was one Saturday from my childhood that stands out in light of my grandfather's passing. On this particular Saturday, we had finished our breakfast and drove to Orel's machine shop, as we so often had for years. When we arrived, the lights were out, the parking lot was empty, and there was a sign on the door that read, "Closed due to owner's death." I understood Orel to be a close friend of my grandfather. In that moment, I expected my grandfather to exhibit some sign of grief or ask to go home. But in my memory of that day, there was just silence, and we simply went on to another project. Now, I'm not suggesting that my grandfather wouldn't want us to grieve, but I am suggesting that despite our routine being rattled on Saturday, he would want nothing more for us than to wake up early on the Saturday, eat breakfast, start a project. For it is on these Saturdays that we've built cars, boats, kitchens, and the strongest bonds imaginable. The original Roger Mason may be gone, but in some respects he is immortal. His desire to serve, his persistence, his resolve lives on in other Roger Masons, and those of us fortunate enough to have shared our life with him. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you see, we have set up a buffet line. We ask that you remain seated until your table is called. Thank you.